Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to lead off tonight with George Irving, who died recently at the age of 94. Nice Jewish boy from Springfield, Massachusetts, and he was primarily a theater actor in New York. He won a Tony, and he played opposite Debbie Reynolds and her 15-year-old daughter, Carrie Fisher, on Broadway in Irene, but that's not what he's known for. He had a distinctive voice, and this is what he's known for.
Underdog is here. Time again for the Underdog Show, starring the champion of champions, Underdog.
It was a dark, moonless night. The city was quiet. Then, suddenly, the darkness was split by a blinding electric flash, and the quiet was shattered by a terrifying electric crackle. On and on it continued. The night lit up by pulsating light and crackling sounds as if a giant firefly had come to life. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended.
Well, Wally Cox is the voice of Underdog, but that's George Irving doing the narration. He did the narration for a couple other cartoons, Tennessee Tuxedo and the Go-Go Gophers, but he's known for that great narration of Underdog. And hey, I don't get a chance to play it that often, but every time I do get a chance, I want to play it. Here's the theme from Underdog.
When in this world the headlines read of those whose hearts are filled with greed, who rob and steal from those who need to right this wrong with bygones, because Underdog, 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 speed of lightning, roar of thunder, fighting all who rob or plunder, Underdog, Underdog, Underdog.
An oddly compelling cartoon that stays with you for decades, and George Irving was the narrator. We're going to move on now to LaVell Edwards, the great Brigham Young football coach who died recently at the age of 86. LaVell Edwards is number 6 in all-time wins in college football history. His team won the national championship in 1984, and he coached a Heisman Trophy winner in Ty Detmer. He also coached other great quarterbacks, including Jim McMahon and Steve Young. Here is Brigham Young University's tribute to LaVell Edwards.
This is a story of a Utah pioneer, a man who foresaw a better way of doing things and had the courage to do something about it. Reuben LaVell Edwards was born in Orem. He graduated from Lincoln High School and played for the Utah State Aggies as a 165-pound offensive lineman. Why Utah State and not BYU? Well, LaVell said, if I'd gone to the Y, I'd have had to live at home. And if I'd been living at home, my job would have been milking the cows. I was sick of those two darn cows. I'd have gone to Utah to get away from them. Well, maybe not Utah, but I wanted to get away. After college, he coached the single wing at Granite High School, an offense designed to do everything but pass. He joined the BYU staff as a defensive assistant in 1962 and became head coach 10 years later. LaVell said BYU hired him because they were one of the last teams to run the single wing, and I think I was the last living Mormon who knew anything about that offense. Once he was given the head job, LaVell made his move. He turned BYU away from the single wing for the forward pass, and the game of football has never looked back. They're all gone now, Lincoln High School, Granite High, the single wing, and 165-pound offensive lineman. And now the coach is gone too. But what remains will live forever. Most important to the coach, aside from Patty and the family, are their relationships. He relished in the development of young men who walked through his door, Mormon or not, returned missionary or not, players with challenges or those without. He loved them all unconditionally. He was humble enough to recognize he didn't know everything and smart enough to hire the people who do. He listened to them. It was an assistant coach that suggested LaVell give Steve Young a shot at quarterback when the coach had him earmarked for defense. And then there was the winning. Lots of it. 257 victories over 29 seasons, 6th most in the history of college football. 27 straight non-losing seasons. 17 straight bowl games, providing some of the golden moments in BYU history. The 1984 undefeated season and national championship. 2-time National Coach of the Year. He coached a Heisman Trophy winner, and in 2004, LaVell himself was inducted into college football's Hall of Fame. Perhaps the most appropriate finish to his illustrious career was an improbable come-from-behind victory at Utah in his final game. LaVell said, as a youngster in Orem, I used to follow BYU football regularly, often while perched in one of the orchard trees adjoining the practice field. My ambition was to be a coach. Now, instead of a cherry tree, the coach can look down from the heavens into a stadium that bears his name and watch another young dreamer, a former player, carry on his legacy for years to come. LaVell Edwards, gone, but never forgotten.
Well, we're going to move on now, and I'm going to move on with a sobering fact. Did you know that we can only account for about 5% of the matter in the universe? That's because the other 95% is either dark energy or dark matter. Dark matter accounts for about 27% of the universe. We can't see it. It's impervious to all our tools, but we know it exists because it holds galaxies that should fly apart together. Well, the person who discovered dark matter was Vera Rubin, who died recently at the age of 88. Nice Jewish girl from Philadelphia. She went to Vassar and then Cornell, and she studied under some of the great physicists of the 20th century, including some people we've talked about before, Hans Bethe, Richard Feynman, and Philip Morrison. She had a modicum of difficulty as a woman because there weren't many women in astronomy, but she secured positions at Georgetown and the Carnegie Institute in Washington, and that's where she described dark matter. Here's a report on Vera Rubin.
Astronomer Vera Rubin has died. She was one of the world's pioneering female astronomers who helped find powerful evidence of dark matter. In 1948, she became the first woman to graduate in astronomy from Vassar College in the United States. Rubin examined more than 200 galaxies, and her groundbreaking research suggested for the first time that a significant part of the universe is composed of dark matter. She was also a strong advocate for women in science. Let's talk now to Ege Esser, a postdoctoral research fellow at the National Tsinghua University in Taiwan. Thanks so much for joining us, Ege. A lot of what Vera Rubin contributed to science is sometimes quite difficult for laymen to understand. So if you can, tell us why she was so important to your field of astronomy. What did she achieve?
She was a remarkable astronomer, and what she showed was the first accurate evidence for the existence of dark matter. This is a kind of matter we still don't understand because it doesn't emit electromagnetic wavelengths, so we cannot observe it directly. But the work by Vera Rubin showed that we need this matter to explain the observations she did. She was studying motions of stars in nearby galaxies. From classical physics, we expect lower speeds as we go further in a galaxy from the central mass. But she showed that the stars at the edge of the galaxies were moving fast compared to the theory.
Okay.
So she claimed that we need another kind of mass, which we call as dark matter, outside the galaxy.
Tell us how much Vera Rubin actually inspired you, particularly as a woman in a very male-dominated area.
All successful women astronomers inspires young generation. This is so true. And when you see such careers and such successful scientists, you always say, oh, if they did it in such a male-dominated world that was in the past, we can also do it now, right? And we should follow their way.
Do you think she got the recognition she deserved over the course of her career?
No, probably not. I mean, she could have suggested for Nobel Prize or some other prizes, I think.
Well, we're going to move on now to Tyrus Wong, who died recently at the age of 106. And Tyrus Wong is a legend in the film community because he was the Chinese-American artist who worked for the Disney studios in the 1930s, and he's responsible for much of the artwork for Bambi, the 1942 Disney film that turned out to be Walt Disney's favorite in terms of art. Tyrus Wong eschewed a lot of hyper detail and went for a naturalistic effect, drawing on his Chinese background and Chinese art, especially that of the Song dynasty. Here are some LA artists commenting on the artwork of Tyrus Wong and Bambi.
Walt had a wonderful way of organizing and finding talent, a typical Walt Disney discovery by seeing his work. It was some time later that we realized he had this marvelous color sense that you'll see in the film itself.
what Tyrus Wong brought to the art direction is just absolutely stunning. And he had thousands of small-scale and large-scale sketches that were very lyrical and had that poetry that Walt wanted.
When you take a step back from the story, which is hard to do with Bambi, but if you can, take a step back, turn off the sound, and just start looking at every image, you will be so stunned at how every scene is like this exquisite painting of nature. Not realistic, in fact, very stylized, but it represents that feeling of being in the forest.
It's the forest of your dreams and the forest you experience rather than the forest you actually see. And that's very much the aesthetic in Chinese landscape paintings.
At that time, Chinese influence just came naturally. We realized the simplicity of Ty's backgrounds. You could still get all the color you needed with simple forms. Then the main characters would show up beautifully in front of that.
I think Walt was fortunate to have Tyrus Wong working there to come up with that concept.
Although he's a very modest man and doesn't realize it, even today there are young artists who still look to him as one of the great talents ever to work in that area of design.
Here's Tyrus Wong talking a little bit about how he got to Disney and what happened when he got there. He faced a lot of discrimination as a Chinese in the 1930s. And at Disney, he got put in the wrong department, and then they wouldn't give him credit. But Walt Disney knew talent, and he knew what he wanted.
That's how eventually the style of Bambi came about. Tyrus Wong just needed a job in the Big Depression.
Maybe why don't you try Walt Disney Studio? So I bought a sample and make appointments with him and show them and say, oh yeah, I think we could train you for $16 a week. Do animation like Mickey Mouse under the light, flip the papers under the light. Gee, when I got home, my eye was just like a couple of tennis balls ready to jump out of the socket. I said, this is terrible. I just can't do this. And I found out they were doing Bambi. And I read the book about it and so forth. I said, gee, that's all outdoor scenery. I said, gee, I'm a landscape painter. This will be great. So I worked up to the tiny sketches, forest with the deer and stuff, to take a back in there, show it to them. Tom Coderick, he said, gee, what are you doing now? I said, well, I'm doing in-betweening. He said, maybe we put you in the wrong department. So I did some of those Bambies and trees, and they come and see this. And then look at it and they say, hey, maybe by that time Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs just released. It's an Oriental style. Come in and say, gee, I like that. So that's how I got followed there. So everybody, come in my style there. So they later on to make me a legend. So I first come out, they didn't give me any screen credit. So later on they found, hey, this guy did a lot of work. I counted him as, Bambi successful. So they finally put my name in there. And now after that, they had the plaque showing that, over in the Hollywood, over the studio inside. So we went over there and put my handprints in there.
I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that Tyrus Wong's story there sort of throws a wrench in the accepted version that Walt Disney was such a racist and wouldn't accept minority artists. Of course, to complete the story, Tyrus Wong had to leave the studio during the strike at Disney, went on to work at Warner Brothers, and when he retired, he became a kite designer on the beaches in California. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. I'm going to close tonight with Robert Hulseman, who died recently at the age of 84. He was a neighbor of Sid and mine. He lived about a mile between us. His father started a paper company on the south side of Chicago. He took it over, and he is responsible for inventing some of our most familiar and ubiquitous products, including those little cups they use for ketchup at restaurants like McDonald's. He also invented the Traveler lid, which I love, that they use at Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. But his most famous invention was the Solo cup, that staple of frat parties and picnics everywhere. He tried blue, yellow, and peach, but settled on red. And the red Solo cup was immortalized by Toby Keith. So that's what we're going to close with. Okay, it's not Gershwin.
Red Solo cup, I fill you up. Let's have a party. Let's have a party. I love you, Red Solo cup. I lift you up.